Hello everyone! Today, we will explore the dramatic stories that happened in the air and in the airport. 3 stories about unruly Karens, from demanding to move the whole family on the plane, live streaming to demand rights in the sky, to causing chaos at the ticket control gate, will make you both annoyed and unable to take your eyes off. If you like stories that are both funny and unbelievable, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Let's get started. I boarded my flight on a crisp Tuesday morning, excited to visit family on the other side of the country. The flight was packed, every seat taken as the cabin crew moved swiftly to ensure a smooth boarding process. I had a window seat near the back of the plane, which suited me perfectly. I love gazing at the clouds and letting my thoughts drift during the flight. Everything seemed to be going well until the moment she arrived. A woman in her late 50s, sharply dressed in a bright blazer, strutted down the aisle with an air of entitlement that turned heads. She carried a designer tote bag, and her expression suggested she was used to getting exactly what she wanted. She stopped a row ahead of me, glancing down at her boarding pass, then at the seat number on the overhead bin. Her face twisted in displeasure. "This can't be right," she muttered, loud enough for those around her to hear. The seat assigned to her was an aisle seat, clearly not what she had been expecting. Huffing dramatically, she flagged down a flight attendant who was helping passengers stow their luggage nearby. "Excuse me," the woman said, her tone sharp and commanding. "There's clearly been a mistake. I specifically requested a window seat, and this is an aisle seat. I need you to fix this." The flight attendant, a young woman with a calm demeanor, smiled politely. "Let me check for you, ma'am. May I see your boarding pass?" The woman handed it over, crossing her arms as she waited. The attendant examined the ticket and replied gently, "It seems you've been assigned this seat, ma'am. Unfortunately, the flight is full, and I can't move anyone at the moment." The woman's eyes narrowed. "That's unacceptable. I paid for this flight, and I don't think it's too much to ask for a window seat. Can't you move someone else? I'm sure someone wouldn't mind switching with me." The attendant remained professional, explaining that seat assignments were set and could not be changed now that the plane was fully boarded. She even offered to make the seat more comfortable by helping the woman with her luggage or adjusting her tray table. But this wasn't enough. "You're telling me I have to sit here, cramped in this aisle seat, while someone else is enjoying my window?" the woman said, her voice growing louder. Passengers around us began exchanging glances, clearly irritated by the scene. I leaned back in my seat, hoping this would blow over quickly. But it was clear this woman, let's call her Karen, wasn't going to let it go. She raised her voice, now addressing the entire cabin. "Can you believe this? I paid good money for this flight, and they can't even give me a decent seat." A few passengers sighed audibly, while others looked away, not wanting to get involved. The flight attendant, still calm, apologized again. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but I assure you we've done our best to accommodate everyone. If you'd like, I can check with you after takeoff to see if there are any adjustments we can make." Karen waved her hand dismissively. No, that's not good enough. I want to speak to your supervisor." At this point, the lead flight attendant, a middle-aged man with years of experience dealing with difficult passengers, approached. He listened patiently as Karen repeated her complaints, embellishing the story to make it sound like she'd been wronged on a grand scale. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "I understand this isn't what you were hoping for, but all seats are occupied. We cannot make any changes at this time. Please take your seat so we can prepare for takeoff." Karen huffed dramatically, but finally dropped into her assigned seat. For a moment, it seemed like the drama was over, but not quite. She began muttering loudly, making sure everyone around her could hear. "This is ridiculous. The service these days is awful. Back when I was younger, airlines actually cared about their customers." Karen's dissatisfaction didn't end once she was seated. The moment she buckled her seatbelt, she flagged down another flight attendant. Her tone was sharp, her posture rigid with indignation. "Excuse me," she said loudly, enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This is absolutely unacceptable. Not only am I stuck in this miserable aisle seat, but you've completely ruined my travel experience. I need compensation for this discomfort." The young flight attendant, already juggling multiple tasks, paused to address her with practiced patience. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry for your inconvenience. Unfortunately, the flight is completely full, and we cannot relocate you. If there's anything else I can do to make your flight more comfortable, please let me know." Karen let out an exaggerated sigh, leaning into the aisle so everyone around could witness her distress. "Comfortable? How am I supposed to be comfortable when I'm squished here with no view and people constantly bumping into me? This is the worst flight I've ever been on, and I expect compensation." The flight attendant's smile remained unwavering. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration. If you'd like, I can provide you with a voucher for a complimentary drink as a gesture of goodwill." Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. A drink voucher? Do I look like someone who cares about a drink voucher? This is insulting. I paid for this flight expecting a window seat, and instead I'm treated like an afterthought. Passengers around her exchanged knowing glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A few leaned closer to one another, whispering comments like, "She's really going for it, huh?" And, "It's just a seat. What's the big deal?" Ignoring the growing murmurs, Karen continued her tirade. "Let me be clear," she said, pointing a manicured finger at the flight attendant. "I'm not just going to sit here and accept this mistreatment. If you don't find a way to fix this, I'll make sure your airline hears about it. I'll write emails, post reviews, and call customer service every single day until this is resolved." The flight attendant, to her credit, remained composed. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns, but as I mentioned, all seats are occupied. We cannot move anyone at this time. I'll make a note of your feedback and ensure it's shared with our team." Karen threw up her hands in exasperation. "Oh, that's just perfect. Pass the buck, why don't you? You think writing a little note is going to fix this? No, I'll be the one fixing it. Just you wait." The lead flight attendant, who had been monitoring the situation from a few rows away, stepped in at that point. His calm, authoritative tone immediately commanded attention. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Karen directly, "I understand you're upset, but I need to ask you to lower your voice. You're disturbing the other passengers." Karen gasped as though he'd accused her of a crime. "Disturbing? Me? I'm the victim here. All I'm asking for is basic respect and the seat I deserve." The flight attendant stood firm. "Ma'am, your assigned seat complies with the ticket you purchased. We cannot disrupt the other passengers to accommodate a change. If you continue to raise your voice, I'll have to report this as a disturbance." For a moment, Karen seemed caught off guard. The murmurs around her had grown louder, and passengers were openly rolling their eyes or shaking their heads. The man sitting across the aisle leaned toward her, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Lady, we all paid for our seats. Some of us are just choosing to deal with it like adults." Karen shot him a glare but didn't respond. Instead, she turned back to the lead flight attendant. "Fine," she huffed. "But don't think for a second that this is over. I'll be reporting this entire crew. I've never been treated so poorly in my life." The flight attendant gave a curt nod. "You're free to contact customer service after the flight. For now, please remain seated so we can focus on providing service to everyone on board." The cabin settled into a tense silence as Karen finally leaned back in her seat, still muttering under her breath. "Unbelievable," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "These people wouldn't know customer service if it hit them in the face." Despite Karen's continued grumbling, the crew began their in-flight service, handing out drinks and snacks. Karen, however, was far from done. When the drink cart reached her row, she waved the flight attendant away dismissively. "Don't bother," she said coldly. "I wouldn't accept anything from this airline even if you paid me." The attendant moved on without comment, and Karen sat with her arms crossed, looking out into the aisle with a sour expression. By now, passengers around her had had enough. A young woman seated behind Karen leaned forward and whispered loudly, "I'm just glad she didn't get a window seat. Could you imagine her complaining about the view?" The man next to her chuckled. "She probably would have said the clouds weren't fluffy enough." The jokes rippled through the cabin, soft laughter breaking out among the passengers. Karen's head snapped around, but seeing the smirks, she huffed and turned back to her seat, refusing to engage further. As the flight neared its destination, the lead flight attendant made one last round through the cabin. When he reached Karen's row, he addressed her with a polite but firm tone. "Ma'am, I hope the remainder of your flight has been comfortable. If you have further concerns, our customer service team will be happy to assist you after we land." Karen waved him off dismissively. "Oh, don't worry, you'll be hearing from me. This airline has lost a loyal customer today." The flight attendant gave a professional nod and moved on. When the plane finally landed, Karen was among the first to stand, jostling past passengers in her rush to grab her bag. She stormed off the plane without a word to the crew, her expression still set in a scowl. As the passengers filed out, several exchanged amused looks and comments about Karen's performance. "That woman needs her own reality show," one man joked. "I'd call it Planes, Complaints, and Entitlement," another quipped. By the time I exited the plane, the mood among the passengers had lightened considerably. Karen's antics now a humorous memory rather than an annoyance. Despite her best efforts to make the flight miserable, the professionalism of the crew and the camaraderie of the passengers had turned it into a lesson in resilience, and a story we'd all remember for a long time. It was a busy Friday evening at the airport, with the terminal alive with the usual mix of travelers hurrying to catch their flights and those relaxing at the gates, waiting for boarding announcements. The atmosphere was bustling but orderly, until Karen arrived at gate 23. Karen, a woman in her late 40s, entered the scene with a noticeable sway in her step and an unmistakable flush on her cheeks. She had spent the past few hours indulging in drinks at the airport lounge, her voice carrying across the room as she shared overly loud stories with strangers. By the time she arrived at the gate, it was clear she'd had one too many. Her confidence, however, remained unchecked as she approached the gate agent, clutching her boarding pass and teetering slightly in her heels. "Evening," she slurred, flashing an exaggerated smile. "I'm ready to board." The gate agent, a young woman named Emily, immediately noticed Karen's condition. Though trained to handle difficult situations with tact, Emily couldn't ignore the strong smell of alcohol on Karen's breath or the way she struggled to stand steadily. With the safety of all passengers in mind, Emily scanned the boarding pass but held it discreetly in her hand instead of returning it. "Ma'am," Emily said politely, "I'm afraid I can't allow you to board this flight. You appear to have had too much to drink, and for safety reasons, we cannot permit intoxicated passengers to board." Karen blinked, her expression shifting from confusion to indignation. "Excuse me? Are you saying I'm drunk?" Emily remained calm. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but it's for your safety and the safety of others. We'd be happy to rebook you on a later flight once you've had some time to recover." Karen's smile disappeared, replaced by a scowl. "This is ridiculous. I'm perfectly fine. You're discriminating against me. I've paid for my ticket, and you have no right to stop me from getting on that plane." Emily offered a professional but firm response. "Ma'am, we do have the right to deny boarding if a passenger is deemed unfit to travel. Please understand that this decision is not personal. It's about ensuring everyone's safety." Karen's voice grew louder, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "Unfit? Are you kidding me? I'm not some drunk off the street. I'm a paying customer, and I have every right to be on that plane." Some passengers exchanged uneasy glances, while others tried to ignore the unfolding drama. A man sitting near the gate whispered to his companion, "This is going to get ugly." Karen, now visibly agitated, planted herself firmly in front of the gate, refusing to move. "I'm not going anywhere until you let me on that plane," she declared, her voice echoing through the terminal. Emily attempted to de-escalate the situation. "Ma'am, please step aside so we can continue boarding the other passengers. I'll be happy to assist you with rebooking your flight." But Karen wasn't having it. She dropped into a chair directly in front of the boarding area and crossed her arms, glaring at the staff. "I'm not moving," she said stubbornly. "You can't bully me like this. I know my rights." The gate area fell into an awkward silence as the standoff continued. A few passengers pulled out their phones, subtly recording the scene. One of the videos would later circulate online, captioned, "Karen causes airport chaos after being denied boarding." Realizing the situation was escalating, Emily called for a supervisor. Within minutes, a senior staff member, Mark, arrived, accompanied by an airport security officer. Mark approached Karen, his tone calm but authoritative. "Ma'am, I'm Mark, the supervisor for this flight. I understand you're upset, but we need you to cooperate and step away from the gate. We're happy to work with you to resolve this, but you cannot block the boarding process." Karen shot him a defiant look. "Work with me? The only thing I want is to get on that plane. I'm not drunk, and I'm not going anywhere until you fix this." Mark maintained his professionalism. "Ma'am, your behavior is disrupting the boarding process, and we cannot allow that. If you do not cooperate, we will have to involve law enforcement." Karen's face flushed even redder, and she shot to her feet. "Law enforcement? Are you threatening me now? I'll have you know. I'll sue this airline for harassment. You're discriminating against me because... She seemed to struggle for the right words. "Because I'm not some boring rule-following sheep like the rest of these people." Her dramatic outburst elicited a few chuckles from passengers who were now openly watching the spectacle. Karen, emboldened by the attention, pointed a finger at Mark. "You're going to regret treating me like this. I'll make sure everyone knows how you people treat paying customers." Karen's bravado faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained it, stepping closer to Officer Daniels and wagging her finger in his face. "Don't you dare touch me! I'm the victim here, and you're all treating me like a criminal." Officer Daniels maintained his composure. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. Please move away from the gate." Karen, rather than complying, shoved the officer's shoulder in a moment of frustration. The crowd gasped, and Karen immediately realized her mistake, but instead of apologizing, she doubled down. "Don't you dare intimidate me! I'll have you fired for this!" The situation had reached its breaking point. Officer Daniels calmly reached for his radio, calling for backup. Within moments, 2 more security officers arrived, and the crowd watched as Karen was escorted away, still shouting accusations of bullying and harassment. As she disappeared down the terminal, the gate area erupted into murmurs of disbelief. Passengers began boarding the flight, some shaking their heads, others sharing quiet laughs about the drama they had just witnessed. "Guess I'll have a story to tell when I land," one passenger quipped, earning a chuckle from those nearby. As Karen was being escorted away by the airport security officers, her protests only grew louder. "This is a complete abuse of power," she shouted, her voice carrying across the terminal. "You're treating me like a criminal, when all I wanted was to board the flight I paid for. I'm going to sue this airport, this airline, and all of you for harassment." Passengers nearby exchanged bemused glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief, while others quietly recorded the scene on their phones. Karen's shouts seemed to grow more incoherent with each step she took, her indignation only fueling her refusal to comply. By the time they reached a quieter corner of the terminal, 2 uniformed police officers had arrived. Their calm, no-nonsense demeanor contrasted sharply with Karen's over-the-top dramatics. One of the officers, a tall woman with a commanding presence, approached her. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Carter. We've been called here because of a disturbance you're causing. For the safety of everyone in this facility, I need you to calm down and cooperate." Karen's face flushed even redder, and she shot to her feet. "Law enforcement, are you threatening me now? I'll have you know, I'll sue this airline for harassment. You're discriminating against me because... She seemed to struggle for the right words. "Because I'm not some boring, rule-following sheep like the rest of these people." Her dramatic outburst elicited a few chuckles from passengers who were now openly watching the spectacle. Karen, emboldened by the attention, pointed a finger at Mark. Karen turned to the officer, her face flushed with anger. "Oh great, now the cops are involved. What are you going to do? Arrest me for asking for basic respect? I'm the victim here, and you people are just piling on to humiliate me." Officer Carter remained composed. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but this behavior is unacceptable. The airline staff and airport security have given you multiple opportunities to resolve this peacefully. I'm now asking you to leave this area immediately. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to detain you." Karen gasped theatrically, clutching her chest as if deeply offended. "Detain me? For what? Sitting at the gate? You're all ganging up on me because I'm not afraid to speak my mind." "Ma'am," Officer Carter replied, her tone firm, "this is your final warning. If you don't leave the premises voluntarily, we'll escort you out." For a moment, it seemed like Karen might back down. Her bluster faltered, and she glanced around at the growing crowd of onlookers. But just as the officers exchanged a hopeful glance, she crossed her arms and sat down on a nearby bench, her expression defiant. "I'm not going anywhere," she declared. "You'll have to drag me out if you want me to leave. And when you do, I'll make sure every news outlet knows how this airport treats innocent women." Officer Carter sighed, motioning to her partner. "All right, ma'am, you've made your choice." The officers moved in, calmly but firmly taking Karen by the arms and lifting her to her feet. As they began to escort her toward the exit, she started thrashing and yelling, "This is police brutality! Let go of me! I didn't do anything wrong!" The crowd watched in a mix of amusement and exasperation as Karen's protests continued, her voice echoing through the terminal. Some passengers clapped as she was led away, while others muttered comments like, "Finally," and "It's about time." Karen's outburst peaked when she attempted to twist free, causing her to stumble. The officers caught her before she could fall, but her exaggerated cries of, "You're hurting me!" only added to the absurdity of the situation. Once they reached a secure area, Karen was placed in a holding room to cool off, and for the officers to take her statement. She continued her tirade, accusing everyone involved of conspiring against her. "You're all going to lose your jobs when I'm done with you," she hissed. "You'll see." Meanwhile, back at the gate, the flight Karen had originally been scheduled to board departed without further incident. Passengers who had witnessed the scene swapped stories, some chuckling at the dramatic end to the ordeal. "That woman is going to be a legend on social media," one passenger joked, holding up their phone. "I wouldn't be surprised if she's trending by the time we land." Later, the police released an official statement confirming that Karen had been temporarily detained for causing a public disturbance and refusing to comply with airport regulations. No charges were filed, but she was banned from the airport for the remainder of the day and would need to rebook her flight through the airline's customer service team. By the time Karen was released, she was visibly exhausted, but still muttering about unfair treatment. She left the airport flanked by officers, who ensured she wouldn't cause any further disruptions. As she disappeared into the parking lot, a sense of calm returned to the terminal. The employees at Gate 23 resumed their duties, and the travelers continued on their way, many with a new story to share about the Karen at the gate. While the incident may have been an annoyance for those involved, it served as a stark reminder of the importance of patience, respect, and knowing when to walk away. For Karen, however, it seemed the lesson was still far from learned. It was supposed to be a quiet flight. The cabin lights were dimmed, the hum of the engines provided a soothing background, and most passengers were settling in for the journey. However, in row 14, Karen sat stiffly in her aisle seat, her jaw clenched and her fingers drumming irritably on the armrest. Across the aisle, a young family occupied a row, two exhausted parents and their lively twin toddlers, who were happily chattering and playing with their toys. The children weren't being particularly loud. They were giggling and occasionally squealing as they clanged their plastic dinosaurs together, but to Karen, the noise was unbearable. She shifted in her seat, letting out an exaggerated sigh, clearly hoping the parents would notice her displeasure. When they didn't, Karen leaned over into the aisle, shooting a pointed look at the mother. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp. "Could you please keep your children quiet? Some of us are trying to have a peaceful flight." The mother, visibly tired but polite, gave a small smile. "I'm sorry if they're bothering you. We're doing our best to keep them calm." "Well, your best isn't good enough," Karen snapped, crossing her arms. "This is a public space, not a playground. You should control them better." The father glanced over, his expression defensive. "They're just kids, ma'am. We've got them under control. They're not screaming or running around." Karen let out a huff, turning away as if she'd been personally affronted. She muttered under her breath, loud enough for those around her to hear. "Unbelievable. Parents these days just let their kids do whatever they want." The twins, oblivious to the tension, continued to play, occasionally letting out peals of laughter. Karen's irritation only grew. After a few more minutes of fuming, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood abruptly. She flagged down a passing flight attendant, her face flushed with frustration. "Excuse me," she began, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "I need you to do something about this situation. Those kids are being disruptive, and I can't sit here listening to this racket for the entire flight." The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, maintained a calm and professional demeanor. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Could you let me know what's going on?" Karen gestured dramatically toward the family. "What's going on is that those kids won't stop making noise, and their parents are just letting it happen. It's completely unacceptable. I want you to move them to another part of the plane." Sarah glanced at the family, who were now looking up with concern. The mother hugged one of the twins closer, as if bracing for another confrontation. Sarah offered Karen a patient smile. "Ma'am, I understand that the noise might be bothersome, but the family is seated in their assigned seats, and the flight is fully booked. Unfortunately, we don't have any available seats to move them to." Karen's eyes narrowed, her tone growing sharper. "So you're saying there's nothing you can do? I paid for this ticket, and I have a right to a quiet flight. If you can't move them, then move me." "I'm sorry, ma'am," Sarah said gently. "We truly don't have any spare seats available. If there's anything else I can do to make you more comfortable, please let me know." Karen's frustration boiled over. "Comfortable? How am I supposed to be comfortable with this chaos going on next to me? I demand to speak to your supervisor." At this point, other passengers began to notice the commotion. A man sitting a row ahead turned slightly, raising an eyebrow at Karen's tone. Across the aisle, a young woman with headphones glanced up from her tablet, clearly annoyed by the disturbance. "Ma'am," Sarah said carefully, "I understand this situation is frustrating, but the children are not breaking any rules, and their parents are doing their best to keep them entertained. I'll be happy to bring you some noise-canceling headphones or a complimentary drink if that would help." Karen's face turned red, her voice rising. "I don't need a drink or headphones. I need you to do your job and make this flight bearable. If you don't take care of this, I'll file a complaint as soon as we land." The twins, sensing the tension, began to fidget, their happy giggles fading into nervous silence. The mother looked at Sarah, her eyes apologetic. "We'll do our best to keep them quieter," she offered softly. "You shouldn't have to apologize," the father muttered, his voice low but firm. "She's the one making a scene." Karen turned on him, her tone dripping with condescension. "Maybe if you parented properly, this wouldn't be an issue." The father started to reply, but Sarah quickly stepped in, her tone calm but firm. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to lower your voice. This is a shared space and everyone is doing their best to make the flight enjoyable. Let's not escalate the situation further." Karen's glare shifted between Sarah and the family, clearly unhappy with the lack of support. She crossed her arms, muttering loudly enough for everyone around her to hear. "This airline is a joke. No consideration for paying customers at all." When the flight attendant calmly explained again that the plane was full and no seats were available to move Karen or the family, Karen's frustration reached a boiling point. She whipped out her smartphone and began recording, her voice dripping with mock outrage. "Look at this, everyone!" she announced loudly, holding the phone at arm's length to capture both herself and the flight attendant in the frame. "I'm being subjected to the most horrendous customer service by this airline. They're refusing to accommodate me, a paying customer, while allowing noisy children to ruin my flight experience." Passengers around her exchanged uneasy glances, some trying to ignore the commotion, while others watched with growing irritation. The young mother clutched her twins closer, clearly embarrassed and uncomfortable. The father leaned toward her, whispering, "Ignore her. She just wants attention." Karen, however, was far from done. "I want everyone to see how I'm being treated," she continued, spinning the camera toward the family. "These parents think it's okay to let their brats run wild, and the airline won't do a thing about it." The father finally spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, they're just kids, and they're behaving as well as any kids can on a plane. Please stop recording us." Karen scoffed, turning the camera back to herself. "You hear that, folks? They think I'm the one causing a problem. Unbelievable." The flight attendant, still composed, stepped in again. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to stop recording. This is a shared space, and your actions are making other passengers uncomfortable." Karen waved the phone dismissively. "Oh, so now you're trying to silence me? Typical. I have every right to document this injustice. People need to know how this airline treats its customers." By now, several passengers were visibly annoyed. A man across the aisle spoke up. "Lady, enough already. We're all tired of your performance. Put the phone down and let us fly in peace." A ripple of agreement spread through the cabin, and Karen's expression faltered briefly. However, she quickly regained her composure, doubling down. "Oh, so now you're all ganging up on me," she said, her voice growing louder. "This is harassment. I'll have you all know I have hundreds of followers watching this right now." A sarcastic voice chimed in from the back. "Yeah, I'm sure they're thrilled to see you throwing a tantrum over kids being kids." Laughter rippled through the cabin, and Karen's face flushed. Before she could respond, the lead flight attendant approached. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "this behavior is disruptive. I need you to stop recording immediately, or we will have to report this as a disturbance and take further action." Karen froze, weighing her options. After a tense moment, she lowered the phone with a huff, muttering about how nobody appreciates honesty these days. The cabin returned to relative calm, though Karen continued to glare at the family and the flight attendants. For everyone else, the ordeal had become a shared story, a bizarre interruption they'd likely recount for weeks. So, we've explored the stories of Karens and the unbelievable dramas on planes and airports. If you've ever been in a similar situation, share it with us in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and ring the bell so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next exciting episodes.